Okay, let's go. Welcome everyone to the UK Azure Virtual Desktop User Group, and this is our August edition, so number 13, I believe. So today we've got a pretty cool agenda. So we're going to do our usual introduction for those of us who haven't been to this before, and then we've got Toby Skerrit, Foundation IT. Sorry, he's going to be talking about a customer study that he did called Bedford Pumps, and how to sort of best choose the GPU VMs in Azure. So pretty interesting presentation. And then I'm going to be giving you the most underprepared presentation ever, which I basically call Winging It, which should be all talking about sort of Windows 365. So there'll be lots of hands-on, and then hopefully we can have a good Q&A about it as well. So quick introduction to those who don't know us. My name's McLoughlin. I've been around for a while. I currently work for a company called Nerdio as the UK field CTO. Co-founder of the AVD community, and also the co-founder of the UK AVD User Group, which you're a member of now. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and you can contact me on Twitter using Virtual Mag or WD Community, and also on my websites there, which I very, very rarely update because I don't have any time. If you want to drop me an email, you can email me there. Over to you, Kirk.
Let me take myself off mute. So, hey everyone, my name's Skerritt. I am a principal technologist, but more and more right now I find myself being a bit of a startup co-founder and CTO for a cycling app called Busby that I created, which is pretty cool. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and obviously very involved in this group. Love catching up with everyone. Hopefully we can get back to seeing people face to face at some point. I do have a blog, YouTube and Twitter and all the usual stuff. If you want to link with me and keep up with my ramblings, you can point your phone at that QR code and it will connect us on LinkedIn, which is pretty cool. And excited to be here. Looking forward to this evening's presentations and learning more from you guys and the group. So
cool. Cheers, Kirk. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we do it every single month, but basically we meet once a month, we present the latest, still need to change that, AVD news and hot topics, and we use Teams. It's going to be recorded, so if you do want to talk about something and you don't want it to be shown to the whole world, let me know and I can switch off the recording, and then hopefully we're going to have some physical events coming too, but let's see how that goes. So we want slots, so if you want to be involved, please let me know. We're fully open now for September, so I haven't got anyone for the first time ever, so if you want to present something, reach out to me or Kirk and we will schedule you in. So we can talk about anything you want to, as long as it's loosely related to Azure Virtual Desktop. Doesn't have to be directly related to Azure Virtual Desktop. I'm quite open to ideas, so it could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours if you really want to. I don't care, as long as you share some cool community stuff. Slack channel as well, so if you want to join other people and talk about Azure Virtual Desktop, I've got a Slack channel, so jump in there and post your problems and requests and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of very clever people on there. We've got people from Microsoft in there as well. Sort of help you with feature requests as well. If you need to request new features, you can do so in there. And Clubhouse as well, so that seems to be getting more and more popular. So every Thursday in 50 minutes time, there's a Clubhouse chat about Azure Virtual Desktop. So join that if you're interested in Clubhouse. It's now available Android as well, but it's quite interesting because I find the conversation flows a lot better because people can't see each other and there's no expectations and stuff. So it's some pretty cool stuff on that. What's new in this month of August? So this is the news section that we do every month, where we just go over the latest Microsoft news. The AVD community relaunch is still sitting there in planning mode because I've had 0 time. We've actually got some sponsors now, so we're having sort of Nerdio and IGL sponsors. So we've got some cash to basically completely redesign the website and relaunch that. So that's happening hopefully next week. but we'll see about that one. So there's going to be lots of new stuff. They're normally weekly newsletter, and we're going to be doing more stuff involved with the community. So community member of the month, we're going to be creating study series and hopefully putting more stuff on YouTube and podcasts and all that good stuff. But we'll see how time passes by with that one. So the first bit of news is Windows 365 is now available. I haven't put a lot of stuff on here because that's what I'm going to be presenting on. So a lot of you have been playing about with it, seeing what it's like, and it's been quite interesting to hear the feedback. I think there's two very different sides from what I can gather. Those who think it's the best thing ever and it's the most amazing thing and blah, 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 blah. And those who are just like, yeah, okay, what's new? So we'll go through that and we'll do a bit of Q&A and get some people's feedback on there as well. So quite an interesting topic to talk about. So I'm going to do that as part of my presentation. Azure AD Join, this is huge. So this has been asked for since pretty much day one, because a lot of people say, well, if I want to do a complete cloud deployment, then why do I have this thing called Active Directory? So many customers are deployed deployed AVD for. You have to deploy Active Directory in actually a real physical server or as a VM within Azure. That's going to go away soon. So we're going to have a native Azure AD Join for Azure Virtual Desktop. So it's in public preview for single user desktops. Multi-user desktops, I understand, will be coming towards the end of the year. The reason why it's so complicated is because it has to add in with all the other Azure services as well. So if you think like Azure Files and sort of mem/Intune and all that kind of stuff, all those things rely on identity. So you need to make sure that we get this right and test all those things against it first. So that's why it's taken like a year to get this out the door. So hopefully Q4 this year or Q1 next year, we're expecting to see that released. So very, very excited to see that. So we'll see how that goes. And we have a FSLogix agent update. Most of you use FSLogix agent, so I thought it was worth mentioning. It's now released 2.0.15. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through that, but there's no real sort of major stuff to it. I guess the only thing worth mentioning is the pretty cool thing that you can expand the VHD file. So if a user who's run out of space, for example, you can easily just expand that for them without having to sort of migrate to a new one, as it were previously. There's a few fixes in there as well. So make sure you're using that. And just for your information as well, the FSLogix agent should automatically be updated on any new VMs that you provision in the Azure portal. But if you're manually managing your images, then make sure you update this as well. And the other bit of news is Ryan Mangan has been very, very, very busy, and he's released 4 Microsoft ebooks that he's written alongside Microsoft. So if you want some free information, go on there. I don't know where he's found the time, to be honest with you. It's hard enough writing one, but he's got them written 4. So great job, Ryan, to help and assist in those and to get those out the door. So here's the links for those. So you can go and have a look at those, downloads and get learning. And that's it. As I said, this has been, because I think a lot of the focus this month has been very much on Microsoft 365. So sorry, Windows 365. So there's not really been that much news. So on that basis, I'm going to hand over to Toby, who will give us a presentation on a customer case study that he did using Azure Virtual Desktop and GPUs.
Hey Neil,
hello.
Thank you. Hey, you can hear me all right. Thank you very much. And guys, thank you very much for allowing me to present at the user group. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. And please let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, can see it.
Fantastic. Hi everybody, my name's Toby Skerrit. I run professional services and architecture for Foundation IT. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about GPU-enabled personal desktops, a project that we did for a company called Bedford Pumps. And then on the end of that, I've got a little bit of information about kind of comparative benchmarking of the GPU SKUs that are available in Azure, because there's not much information about GPU-enabled desktops out there, so I thought I would do some benchmarking for it, and I've created a little blog around that as well, which you can look at if you have an interest in that. So, background on this then. This is a fairly high-level presentation. I'm not going to go into any particularly technical details about it, but what I'm going to talk about is how we went through justification for the project, some of the business benefits, and also some of the kind of gotchas and caveats that you'd probably want to be aware of if you're doing something similar. So Bedford Pumps design and build industrial scale pump solutions, mainly in the kind of wastewater sector. So they were classed as a critical industry throughout the pandemic because obviously these pumps need to run all the time. They're part of a group called the Hydrostal Group, who we provide a managed service for. So we manage all of their on-premise and Azure-based infrastructure. And we also migrated them from a Azure-based RDS implementation, so traditional RDS, across to WVD as it was, AVD now. And we use Nerdio quite extensively to implement and manage that AVD platform. Bedford Pumps are pretty heavy users of SolidWorks. They've got, I think, probably 10 to 15 CAD users. Who all use SolidWorks and use SolidWorks to create those models and then pass those models across to manufacturing. So obviously during the pandemic, these users have been working from home and connecting back to their office CAD desktops via whichever remote software they felt like, probably something like LogMeIn, which, you know, great software, but not necessarily the best solution for allowing you to get onto your desktop and create and edit complex models. So they were looking for a solution there. Obviously, those desktops weren't new. These were fairly aged CAD desktops. So even in the office, modeling was fairly problematic. And they were looking for another solution. Now, obviously, in the middle of the pandemic, sourcing replacement CAD desktops was expensive, but also pretty difficult. Anybody who tried to find an NVIDIA or a AMD-based graphics card during the height of the pandemic was probably on a fairly long wait list. You know, coupled with the fact that lots of people were using them for mining as well, which was always a challenge. But even if you were buying an integrated one, even if you were buying something from Dell or HP, you probably had kind of a 2 or 3 month lead time in order to get those devices. So they needed something turned around fairly quickly that would allow them to work in the way they needed to. Now, on top of that, and in regards to replacing these CAD desktops, there's quite a lot of uncertainty over when or even if people would be returning to the offices. As we're all kind of aware now, we still don't necessarily know when we'll all be working back in the office, if we do at all. So they were uncertain, but they had this requirement to create those models and work collaboratively. They also took advantage of, anyone that knows SolidWorks will probably know this, that a PDM server, which is a central management server that allows for check-in and check-out of models and gives you that audit trail on who's made changes to a model and allows you to kind of step back on those changes as well. So that was something else we needed to take into account, this centralized management server. And obviously cost management was a huge concern. GPU-enabled desktops in Azure are many things, but cheap is not one of them. So that's something that everybody needs to take into account when they're looking at this type of option. So solution to that then was to initially test and deploy personal GPU-enabled Azure VMs with Windows 10 Enterprise, specifically not multi-session. We did in fact look at a session host-based solution initially with the customer. And it actually worked quite well, but it doesn't work with the SolidWorks licensing model that the customer had in place, and they weren't particularly keen to change that model. Session hosts are obviously in most instances for task workers the best option, but in this specific case, users needed administrative control of their desktops. They needed to install additional components. we felt it was better to provide a full desktop to these users. We used Azure Site Recovery as the migration mechanism for the PDM server, fairly standard. Obviously, there's the option there for the newer Azure migrate, but we didn't have full confidence that this server would work properly in Azure, and we also wanted the users to test and validate first. And so we wanted a simple solution for failback if required. ASR obviously gives you some automation in regards to kind of updating DNS and that kind of stuff. So we were comfortable with ASR, and that's the reason that we went for that solution. And we also created domain joined file shares for additional file management. So although we had FS Logic in place for the larger WVD AVD deployment that we'd done for the Hydrostal group, it didn't feel appropriate for these full user desktops. We just went with local profiles for them, and these machines are backed up via Azure Backup. So it's essentially the exact equivalent of a physical desktop or laptop, but replicated into Azure and with Azure Backup rolled over the top of it. But this domain joined file share was created to allow for additional file management. So copying of ad hoc model files, uploading of update executables, that kind of stuff, just ad hoc additional stuff. And managing costs via automation and providing user self-service functionality via Nerdio. I don't want to put in too much of an advert for Nerdio, but this was critical to the solution that we were proposing, because we required automation in order to keep the costs down by starting up and shutting down these machines dynamically, and it makes a huge difference to the costs. So the SKU that we settled on was an AMD-based SKU, which is an MV16 ASV4. That's the SKU that in Microsoft and SolidWorks white paper, which is available online, that was the SKU that they specified as the sweet spot for using SolidWorks within Azure. But it's hugely expensive. It's £600 a month, which, you know, okay, great, it's very flexible, but after 3 months, you could have bought yourself an all singing, all dancing CAD desktop, 3 or 4 months. So that just wasn't going to fly, especially as you scale that up to 10, 15 users. That's a huge cost, which would make them potentially uncompetitive with their competitors. So how did we address that? Well, Nerdio kind of came to the rescue here. We used automation within the Nerdio environment to specify, rather than a 24/7, 7 days a week desktop being up and available with no one using it, we had these machines only start up Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. So that's what, 11 hours a day, 5 days a week. So pretty decent saving there of about, 60%, I'd say. We were originally allowing users to start up and shut down their desktops manually, again using Nerdio's manual end user console, which is shown on the right hand side here, where users can start up and restart their desktops as and when they need to. We faced some challenges throughout the project, which I'll come on to towards the end of this presentation. But yeah, we had to change that. We had to make these machines automatically start up, and we chose 6 a.m. as the right time for that. Start on Connect's an option, obviously, now, rather than having to give users the option to start up their desktops manually from a console. But I'm not a huge fan of the kind of user experience of Start on Connect. It's great, it's a useful service to have, but if I click a button, I expect it to be the desktop to be available to me in kind of 5 or 10 seconds, whereas I think Start on Connect's a couple of minutes, which would frustrate me, I think, and might frustrate other users. So we avoided that, and we haven't looked at it. So with those optimizations that we put in place, we achieved around about 65% saving, I think. So rather than £600 a month, obviously this is just the compute resource costs, it comes out at around 217, which is still quite expensive, but acceptable, and with the additional flexibility it offers, was something that the company Bedford Pumps were happy to accommodate. it does also obviously give them that additional flexibility, and with the visibility of the costs that you see within Azure, you can build that into your cost of sale. So technical challenges, there are a few. The biggest challenge we found was around resource availability. This was November 2020, coming into the early part of 2021. As I mentioned, we were originally looking at session hosts, but licensing didn't support that. Would have been a lot cheaper if we could have gone down the session host route. The UK South region at this point had really limited GPU availability. I'm not sure that there were even any, or if there were some SKUs, I think I might have requested some quota and got offered maybe 4 cores or something, which isn't really going to be much use. The existing infrastructure for Drossel lived in West Europe. That's where it had been built, and West Europe had really good GPU availability and still does. An acceptable latency, we're probably 20 milliseconds, I guess, to West Europe, which is acceptable. Obviously, all the testing and discussions had to be conducted remotely, so all of the user testing, and we're reliant on the user's home internet performance for that testing. This was a point I was mentioning to Neil earlier. Bandwidth exhaustion in RDP tends to manifest itself in the same way that a underspec'd desktop would. So if you're using PC over IP, for example, it tends to bandwidth exhaustion tends to manifest itself as pixelation, which is a pretty good indication of in most scenarios, if you're watching YouTube or something, of bandwidth exhaustion. But in RDP, it tends to manifest itself as drop frames and a low frame rate, which can be quite challenging because that can also be how a underspec desktop would perform. So that was something we had to accommodate. So technical challenges. So it was all working beautifully until we got to project sign off. So for 3 or 4 months, this worked without a hitch. Users were starting up their own desktops, and these machines were probably costing them £150 a month rather than the 217 I mentioned earlier. Not automated startup. One day the manual startups failed. Nobody could start their machines. And we were getting some interesting errors when we tried to via the Azure console. And it turned out that Azure was having pretty significant capacity challenges for all of these AMD GPU SKUs. My suspicion is that somebody else had a similar idea to us and was automating the startup had decided to move on to these SKUs and was automating the startup. And when our users were coming to start these machines up, there was no capacity available within the region for them. That was a bit of a problem, really, because these guys needed to work. So we addressed that by briefly moving them across to one of the NVIDIA SKUs. Slightly more expensive, but at least there was resource availability. In terms of migration from one SKU to another, so from AMD to NVIDIA, that's pretty straightforward. The only thing that is required is the extensions in the Azure virtual machine. So AMD GPUs require the AMD drivers, and NVIDIA require the NVIDIA drivers, which can be deployed as extensions. So it's just a case of changing the extensions, restarting the machine, and within SolidWorks, if you change a GPU, it will reset itself to software acceleration, so you have to go in and change it to hardware acceleration again. But it's a fairly straightforward process, and we got them working again. But in the end, we moved this. We set a startup time for all these desktops. I think it was probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we moved that, and we had them starting up at that time just to secure those resources in the early morning, and that did resolve the problem. But yeah, not a great solution really, and something you'd like to avoid. Those capacity constraints have been resolved in West Europe. I think it was around May, June that they were resolved, but yeah, it was a challenge, and getting to the bottom of it was quite hard as well. So takeaways from the project then. GPU enabled SKUs are very specialist, and availability is understandably limited. Microsoft aren't going to spend a lot of money on putting these SKUs in place and have them sat there until they go obsolete. So there's an element of just-in-time availability there, I think. They're expensive, these desktops, compared to physical desktops, but they do offer a huge amount of flexibility. You can access a GPU enabled desktop and perform modeling from any device really. You know, a pretty old laptop will still allow you to do that, so that's pretty good, and from any location as long as you've got the bandwidth available. The SKU options do change regularly and should be reviewed often. If you follow a similar model to us, you're going to want to be aware of when those SKUs are going end of life, because what you don't want to happen is for the desktops to attempt to start up one day and for those SKUs to no longer be available. So getting ahead of the curve in that respect and making sure that those that you change to a SKU with a longer life is a worthwhile thing to do. Automation, as I discussed, offers a significant opportunity for savings. So, I mean, it just makes sense. Yeah, these machines should be deprovisioned when they're not in use because they're hugely expensive resources. But bear in mind, there's no guarantee for availability for these SKUs without reserved instances, so use with caution. Reserved instances I haven't mentioned so far. Reserved instances should resolve this problem because you're essentially taking out a contract with Microsoft whereby you are purchasing the compute availability for those instances for a period of time, 1, 2, 3 years, I think. But it's still more expensive compared to the solution we have here. So we took this gamble. And as we know, working from home is a new normal for many. So more people, more organizations, I think, are getting more interested in these types of SKUs. So that was our project overview, and hopefully that gave a good idea of how we addressed the issues that we saw there. What I also did, as I mentioned at the start, is post-project, I did some performance comparisons against the available SKUs just because there was nothing really available. And some of these are fairly basic and fairly rough and ready, but it does give us an apples to apples comparison of how these different SKUs, these different GPU offerings perform relative to each other, which I think is quite useful. So as I say, there's a blog that I've done on this, which is available on LinkedIn, which, you know, if you're interested, please go and have a look. So 3 different flavors essentially of mid to high range GPU enabled machines available at the moment, designed for remote visualization, streaming, gaming, encoding and VDI scenarios. There's NVAS V4 series machines, which are powered by AMD and use a virtualized Radeon Instinct M125 GPU. Probably around about 2017, I think, is the release date for this GPU. So it's not super new, but it should be able to cope with most workloads. On the NVIDIA side, the NVV3 offers Tesla M60 GPUs. Again, probably around 2017 that GPU was released, so not super new, but still capable of running most workloads at acceptable performance. And more recently, and one that I was unaware of till recently, the NCAS T4 SKUs, which Microsoft specifies as being used for more demanding workloads. These machines are based on the flavor of the month, the AMD EPYC CPUs, married to NVIDIA Tesla T4, so a newer processor and a newer GPU as well. And thanks very much to Nathan Bird, who presented last month highlighting this. He mentioned that Microsoft have told them to look at that. Now, in the blog, I have some various comparisons using a few benchmarks. You may have seen some of these before. There's the superposition benchmark, which I think is the most recent. That was released around 2017. Heaven is a bit older, it's about 2014, and Fermark has been around forever, probably like 2007 or something. But Fermark's a useful tool for heating up your room. But on top of that, it's a fairly useful tool for kind of pushing a GPU as far as it will go, really. And the other two are essentially graphical demos. I was planning to include the industry standard benchmark, which would have been 3D Mark, but it has a lot of restrictions about how you can run it. It doesn't like running in an RDP session. I probably could have hacked that a bit, but I decided to drop it and just go with these 3. So all of these benchmarks were undertaken in Windows mode with window of 1920 by 1080, and the settings are shown there as well. So I've got the individual details in my blog, but the most important thing I think is this performance comparison, where we've got two series. One is cost pence per hour and the other is average performance. And the closer together the two are, essentially kind of gives the better bang for buck. And you can see that in the case of the NC4AS, the orange line actually dips below the blue line, which shows that it performed far better than any of the other available machines. And what this shows, I mean, if you look at RDP is an interesting protocol. There was some discussion about this at the start. RDP actually only supports 30 FPS kind of out of the box and 60 FPS if you tweak it. So anything above 60 FPS is wasted, essentially. There's no real point in even going above that if you're using RDP. There are other options out there like Teradici's PC over IP, which will allow you to go beyond that and give you better performance. But that's not where RDP sits. So at the very bottom of the pile there, the MV4AS performance was pretty poor, I have to say. You would not be able to use that SKU for any type of 3D modeling at all. The performance just wasn't there. The purpose, I think, of that SKU is for lightly accelerating browser performance. So to give you a hardware accelerated web browser, but not really for 3D modeling. It doesn't work very well at all. But as you can see, the best SKU there is the NC4, the more recent one. So conclusions on that then. As I mentioned, 30 to 60 FPS for RDP is the max that you're going to achieve. But for 3D modeling, it's important to remember that high frame rates aren't necessarily required. If we're talking about animation or we're talking about video editing, then RDP is probably not the right protocol to use, because you're going to need, or you're going to want, frame rates over and above that. But if you can achieve for modeling anywhere above sort of 20-25 frames per second consistently, that's going to be adequate. But the most important thing is the consistent experience, even when you're working with large, highly complex models. But you know, if you're running at 120 frames per second for modeling, yeah, it's nice, but it's not going to give you a tangible benefit unless you're performing animation on those models as well. It's NC4AS head and shoulders above any of the other SKUs. It beats it from a cost perspective and a performance perspective. So from my perspective, if you are looking to implement GPU enabled desktops in the near future, that should be your go-to SKU. There's no point really in looking at any others unless you have a specific AMD driver requirement, for example. We're in the process of migrating Bedford across to this because it will reduce their costs from where they are currently significantly and potentially give them better performance as well. So apologies for jumping in front of Neil talking about Windows 365, which I'm sure is what most people are here to listen to. I hope it was useful or at least interesting. If anybody would like to chat more with me about the implementation that we did or any challenges that you might have, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Toby. That was a really, really good presentation. And real world use cases, real world scenarios, and that's what I want to see more of, because I think most people will find that more interesting. So really, really great presentation.
Thanks, Neil.
Has anyone got any questions at all around GPUs or anything about the project that I delivered? Nope. Okay, good. Well, thanks for that. Great presentation. Right, now we're going to talk about the wonderful world of Windows 365. So I'm going to apologise. This may be the worst presentation you've ever seen. I only had like half an hour to prepare, so we'll see. We'll try and wing it. Right, so let me just press Control. Can you just press Allow on that for me, Toby? Oh, that's me controlling. No, don't worry. I need to share my screen.
Sorry, I've stopped presenting now.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Right. So I'm going to talk about Windows 365. Obviously, this was released, I think, either this week or last week, I can't remember now. But essentially, I want to give a very high-level overview of what it is and try and answer some outstanding questions that you may have. But essentially, my goal for this presentation is for you to walk away knowing exactly what it is and when you should use it over Azure Virtual Desktop, vice versa as well, because there's been a lot of confusion around people asking, well, do I really need it, or how does it compare to Azure Virtual Desktop, that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, we'll be able to answer all those questions inside your head. But if you have any questions during the presentation, please just ask away. Okay. Right. Okay. So start. So what is Windows 365? So who here hasn't heard of Windows 365? Anyone? No. Okay. So Windows 365. So it's essentially it's Microsoft's new product. It's a subscription-based service, which is essentially part of the Microsoft. No.
Huh?
Someone needs to go on mute. Can you see if you can mute him, Kirk? Oh, okay. So it's Microsoft Windows 365 is the subscription service, which is part of Microsoft 365. Okay, so most important thing to note, it's a fixed price monthly subscription service. Okay, so you pay for a set price for a VM hosted by Microsoft in Azure. Okay, and the important thing to remember is it's hosted by Microsoft in their own subscription. Right, so as today we used to hosting resources in our own subscriptions. Windows 365 is hosted within Microsoft subscription. Okay, so Microsoft look after the storage and the compute for you. Okay, so that's the biggest differentiator between what you see with like Azure Virtual Desktop or any other VM or any other resource in Azure that you manage. Okay, so Microsoft are responsible for the compute and the storage within their own subscription. And as I mentioned, it's a dedicated to a user. It's a one-to-one mapping. So there's no multi-session within Windows 365. It's a one-to-one mapping. So it's assigned to a user. And also it's a fixed price, and irrelevant whether you use it or not, you pay for that resource. That's the other big difference between Azure Virtual Desktop. So say if you've got 200 people you want to give it access to, you need to buy 200 licenses. Like it doesn't care whether you use them or not. You pay for licenses, it's subscription as a service, essentially. Okay. And so from a sort of very high level overview, this is what it looks like. So compatibility wise, it's pretty much the same as your Virtual Desktop. So you can connect it from a Windows client, a Mac OS client, all those kind of stuff. So authentication at the moment. So I'll go to in a bit more detail, but there's two SKUs. There's what the business version and the enterprise version. Okay. Interestingly enough, they're both exactly the same price, but they just offer different stuff. Okay, which we'll go through shortly. So for the business cloud, it's Azure AD only. Okay, so it doesn't support your Active Directory domain joins or Azure Active Directory domain joins or anything like that. It's purely Azure AD join. Okay, so enterprise cloud, you need a Active Directory environment up and running. It doesn't support Azure Active Directory domain services, which is quite interesting. So you need a full-on Active Directory, which obviously you need to sync up with Azure AD, because that needs to be in hybrid mode as well. Okay, so very important requirements there for you. Also network connectivity as well. Again, we'll go into this a bit more detail, but the enterprise cloud PC does something called VNet injection. So whereas Microsoft are responsible for the compute and the storage, you are responsible for the networking, right? So it basically injects the VNet into your own resource group in your own subscription, and then you can set all your Azure firewall rules or however you want to do it, or your connectivity back to your on-prem environment, stuff like that. So that feature is not available within the business version. That's an enterprise only feature. So if you look at this from a high level point of view, if you've got an environment where you say, example, a small business environment where they have workgroup PCs, they don't need to connect to anything, they just need an internet connection. That's essentially what business version is, right? But then again, if you've got an environment where you've got a couple hundred users, you need that domain connectivity, you need the on-prem connectivity, you need a bit more customization. That's where you would go down the enterprise route. Okay, so that's the biggest difference between them both. Any questions on that so far? Nope. Okay. So how do you connect? So you can connect to it using a URL, which interestingly enough, if you watch it, just redirects straight back to the normal one that you use to connect to your Azure version desktop. So I can show you that. So let me just lost that. So if you go here, what you'll see is click on the URL, and then you'll go to windows365.microsoft.com. Okay, and this is what you can see. So this is my desktop, and then you can open that in the browser session. Okay, and that just tells you what you've got, and you can do some basic stuff there like restart, rename it, or troubleshoot it. Okay, so quite basic, not really much you can do. Go to here, and that will launch a session into your desktop using the web console. Okay, so that's simple to use, and you can see that just connects to the rdweb.wd.microsoft.com. Yeah, so it's going through the same infrastructure that you have for Azure version desktop, right? In here. So the user experience is pretty much exactly the same from a user endpoint connectivity point of view as you get from Azure version desktop. Okay, and that's it. So exactly the same as you get previously. Okay, so we'll go for
Neil.
Yeah.
Neil, question. If you just want to trial it out, the 2-month trial, if you do as a business scenario, you said the business desktop, that's not AD join, so that's AG join, but it's not the Active Directory join, so that should be a better option if you just want to test it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you got, I mean, to test out the business version, you don't need anything. You don't even need Azure subscription. So if you want to set that free, I mean, that trial that you mentioned, that's now finished because Microsoft had run out of resources. So just so you know, Microsoft initially gave the whole world a 60-day trial, and I think within a couple of hours, all the resources have been used up. So that's disappeared. Whether it'll come back again, we don't know. So if you want to try it out at the moment, you're out of luck, I'm afraid. You'd have to go actually purchase the license. Okay. Right. So go back to here. So as I mentioned, that's the. Go back to it. So the burning question: how much does it cost? So this is the price. Apologies, it's in dollars. So for a basic 2 CPU VM, 4 gigs of RAM, with like 128 gig SSD, you're looking around $30 a month, or $31 a month, right? So pretty cheap, you'd say. But as I mentioned, just think about if you're using Azure version desktop, comparison side by side. I say that's a set amount, irrelevant whether you use it or not. So you need to provide that for users. And also remember, you need to provide a Windows license for that as well. So this is a separate license for Windows 365 separately. So you still need a Windows Enterprise license. And if you're using Enterprise Management on top of that, you also need an Intune license. So you need to pick one of the licensing options which has that. So the Microsoft M365 E3 license, for example, you get the Intune stuff for that. So, and as you can tell, you can go right up to like an 8 CPU, 50 gigs of RAM, and that's going to cost you like $158 a month. So that's the pricing. And we just worked out a quick comparison against how much it can cost you compared to Azure version desktop. So on a personal hostable basis with pay-as-you-go with auto scaling enabled, we worked out that on average it's around 9-10% cheaper to go with Azure version desktop, purely because you're only paying for what you use essentially. So when you're speaking with customers, it's kind of thing, well, are they okay to pay a little bit more for that simplicity? Because as we'll touch upon shortly, Windows 365 is incredibly simple to deploy compared to Azure version desktop. So we need to weigh out those options. Do you want the simplicity, or do you want a bit of a cheaper option with getting a bit more effort into putting it get set up? And this is the price difference between a host pool saving. So as you can imagine, because we're using multi-session on AVD comparison, the savings are a lot more, right? Up to 58% savings compared to a license. So again, when you're thinking about deploying it, just think about the cost, because if you compare it side by side, Windows 365 is going to be a lot more expensive. So personally, I see the use case in the small environments who need that simplicity, who are happy to pay that little bit extra cost, but that's a conversation that you need to have with customers, with what option when you're walking through with them. Okay, any questions around that?
Neil, is there any reserve instances for the 365, or you can pay
You
for a
don't need
month
them.
and then
Yeah, so you
can
don't
use
need
it for a
them.
month and delete and get rid of it after a month? That's fine,
Yeah.
is it?
Correct. Yeah. So you pay for it the whole month, right? So you don't need reserved instances because it's your VM. So you can use it as much as you want to, or as least as you want to. Okay.
Does this include the Windows Linux or Microsoft Linux?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
We suspect that may be coming in the future, which is why they renamed it. But we'll see.
So just a quick question also, if you could say, if you compare performance,
Yep.
if you say a light user, because actually I haven't seen the 1V CPU 2 GB RAM on the Windows 365 website. I've only seen the 2 vCPU 4 GB. So, yeah, but I mean, if I have, let's say, a multi-session host, let's say with 32 cores,
Yep.
and it's not fully used, let's say I've got, you don't always have all the users on the host, so potentially you could have a better experience on the multi-session host, whereas with the light user you're almost limited. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if the server's not busy, you've got your 30 users, but only 20 of them are busy, and only 2 of them using light, and one user can still actually almost get a premium user experience, isn't it, on multi-session?
Exactly, but you pay for that, obviously.
Yeah, but I think what I'm trying to say is potentially you're limited with a light user, but on a multi-session you've got potential benefit.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the light users, I think they're just designed for people who run very basic stuff like Notepad, for example. I can't imagine you get much done on a 1 CPU and 6 gig RAM machine, but maybe for the very again specific use cases. So, but interesting pricing. To be honest with you, myself, I thought it was more expensive than I thought it was going to be. It's not cheap in any instance. So I mean, you may seem, oh yeah, $41 a month, that's cheap, but when you say work it out like in a 1,000 user environment, that's a lot of money. So it's be interesting to see what response is from people. Any questions on the pricing before we move on to the next slide? Okay, so as I touched upon, there's 2 separate versions. There's a business version and there's the enterprise version. So the business version, as I mentioned, is very, very simplified. So you get to provision it directly from the product page. There's no domain to configure. So you don't get the option for domain connectivity. You can do resetting the machine yourself from a self-service portal, and you can cloud save stuff. So that means basically just OneDrive for Business installed by default, and that's how you'd look after your data on that desktop. Okay. So as you can tell, the feature-wise compared to enterprise is very different. So enterprise is, as it says on the tin, is very much aimed towards those enterprise environments which need that bit more flexibility. So enterprise environments, you can do stuff like self-service upgrades, which means if you want to, that's controlled by Intune/mem. So there's a policy you can set, and that means you can either give the users the ability to upgrade their own machines. So if a user wants a temporary boost of 2 weeks or something to do some work, they can do that, and you can set the times in that to do that as well. Universal print integration that comes with enterprise, and also sort of graph APIs and sort of tooling You get that with Enterprise. Custom images, so that's quite an important one as well. So within Windows Business, you only get the default Azure SKUs, and then it's up to you to control the applications on there. Within the Enterprise version, you can create your own images and use them to deploy onto the sort of Windows 365 deployments that you do as well. Image management, mem integration / Intune, you get that with Enterprise, endpoint analytics and all that kind of stuff. So as mentioned, what I can't get my head around is the Enterprise version is exactly the same cost as the business version, so I'm not quite sure what the benefit you get from deploying the 365 business version, but interesting thoughts around that. Be interesting to hear people's opinions about why you do that, but I guess it's down to simplicity, which is why they have the 365 version, business version. Okay, so the grueling question which we get asked often is, how does it differ from Azure Virtual Desktop? So this is a very high level overview. So as we just touched upon, as we just saw, the control plane is exactly the same as in Azure Virtual Desktop. So you can connect in over the same brokers. Obviously, probably the same data centers, but I know they may have a separate racks or something in the data center, especially for the Windows 365. Azure subscription, so within Windows 365 Enterprise, the only bit which you manage is the networking, as touched upon. Microsoft look after the compute and the storage. For the business version, it's fully managed by Microsoft, so you can't do anything on the networking, compared to Azure Virtual Desktop, where you configure all that yourself, so you're in full control. Okay, compute, Windows 365, Microsoft managed all of it. Okay, for Windows 365, so you don't have access to it, you can't do anything to it, apart from the changes that you do through the portal. For Azure Virtual Desktop, obviously you have usage-based cost, so you can switch stuff on and off, and you only get charged for what you use, so a bit more flexible on that. Storage, so Microsoft managed again on the Windows 365, you can't change anything, so I think it's standard SSD by standard. I think some people have been doing some testing and it's not that great performance. So again, with Azure Virtual Desktop, we get full flexibility with our storage. We can pick standard SSD or premium SSD, or we can use FSLogix and all that kind of stuff. So a lot more flexibility there. Networking, Windows 365 Enterprise, you can do that the same as you would do within your Azure Virtual Desktop. As I mentioned, the VNet is injected into the resource group, exactly the same as it would be within Azure Virtual Desktop. So you have that customization of being able to control your traffic if you need to. Business, you can't control the network at all. So you hold it upon, all you can do is connect to the desktop and that's it. User profiles for Windows 365, you don't have any FSLogix, it's local profiles only. In theory, there's nothing stopping you from installing the agent and configuring stuff, but I guess the only problem you have is like the fact that your compute is one place and the storage is another place, and you might get a bit of latency. But it's designed just to use local profiles only. With Personal and Azure Virtual Desktop, you get the option to use FSLogix if you want to, or you can use FSLogix on your Azure Virtual Desktop as well. Identity, as I touched upon, hybrid AD join is required for Enterprise. Azure AD join coming soon, and Azure ADDS is not supported. So if you do use Azure ADDS, you can't use it in an enterprise environment. So keep that in mind. And business, Azure AD only. So no ADDS option. Azure Virtual Desktop, you do what you want. So you can have Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure AD, the native Azure AD domain joins coming, or you can use full-on Windows Active Directory. Okay, do you understand that? Is any questions around that?
Yeah, I think the big piece missing is obviously what you're doing without ADDS then. So you need to manage everything with Intune on the enterprise, right? Intune instead of group policies, for example.
Correct. Yeah, so that's where Microsoft are pushing you down. So, I mean, you could either do it two ways. You can, most customers I speak to, they just build a few domain controllers within the cloud and set up Azure AD Sync to sync with Azure AD. And then in theory, there's nothing stopping you from, obviously, because you domain join a device, you can use group policy. If you pick the Windows 365 Enterprise SKU, you can use group policy to control those. but the preferred method which Microsoft are pushing us down are to manage everything by either Mem or Intune. So that's the way forward, essentially.
Okay.
Okay. So we've done this quick decision flow. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's basically trying to help you understand what the flow should be when you're looking to deploy it. So less than 10 desktops, no brainer, use Windows 365 because the cost differences are going to be minimal for that size environment. And if you don't have all the requirements that it brings, it's definitely worth just doing that. For me, that's going to be the most popular deployments that we're going to see out there. Those people who just want to quickly spin up some desktops within like half an hour or something. We'll go into how long it takes in a minute after we do the hands-on demo. So the other one, if you've got little or no desktop virtualization experience, then again, Windows 365 is a great win for you. As good as your as your desktops are, it can take a bit of skill to get up and running unless you use Nadio. It's so if you don't have that skill, then definitely this is an option if you don't mind paying a little bit extra as well. The other decision point is do the end users require local admin rights, and are they using them more than 55 hours a week? If they are, then again, this one may be a better option for Windows 365, especially if you go above those 55 hours, because then it could become more expensive and to run them on Azure virtual desktop potentially if you're not using like auto scaling stuff. And the other key question is remote app requirement. So there is no remote app in Windows 365. So no app publishing, so it's purely a full-on desktop, and that's it. Obviously, if you use Azure virtual desktop, you can publish remote apps to those as well. The other decision point is quantity of virtual desktop really fluctuates throughout the month. If you need that, then you definitely should go to Azure virtual desktop because you only pay for what you use. And also is cost a primary consideration. Again, that should be Azure virtual desktop because as we touched upon, it's more expensive to run sort of Windows 365 compared to Azure virtual desktop. So that's just some things to think about when you're speaking to customers about the decision trees. So what's the difference from the IT admin side? So management portal for Windows 365, we're using Microsoft Endpoint Manager, right? So that's how we manage the environment, that's how we're pushed upon. And so there's going to be a lot of investment in MEM over the past few years, I'd say. Over the past previous years, it's been gaining popularity. As we just mentioned, sort of group policies have been migrated into there. It's starting to get more and more traction. So I think this is going to give it a final push as the kind of premier function we want to manage desktops with. Whether that's a physical device, a virtual device, or whether it's a phone, or whether it's a tablet or whatever, I think MEM's the way to go. So Azure Virtual Desktop obviously manages everything by the Azure portal or Nadio. Operating system, so Windows 10 Enterprise single session only, as touched upon. There is no multi-session. Obviously, if we go down the Azure Virtual Desktop route, we can either pick Windows 10 Enterprise, single, multi, or Windows Server if we need to as well. Desktop image management, so that's also going to be the big change. So when we talk about AVD, we talk about managed images, where people sort of update images and then push them out. With Windows 365, think about it as a physical desktop. Yeah, you deploy it once and then you let it run and then you manage it as you would do with a physical device. That's the big mental shift, I think, which people need to start thinking about if they're deploying this. They manage it the same as they would do as a physical device. Yeah, so patching, application deployment, do all that exactly the same as you would do with physical devices. Backup in DR, there is no backup in DR for Windows 365 at the moment. I believe it may be coming in the future, but at this time it's not backed up. So they want you to keep all your data within OneDrive, and so you can, if you need to reprovision that desktop at any time if there's a problem, then you still got all your data there, or maybe SharePoint or places like that. Obviously, with Azure Virtual Desktop, you get full-on backup and DR flexibility. And the other thing to remember is within Windows 365 is you are in full control of Microsoft. If there's a problem, it's Microsoft's job to fix it. So we do know there are outages, so that's one thing to be wary of. But I guess you could say the same thing about Azure, but I guess you have more control about where you have like DR and stuff like that to make the environment as highly available as possible. Monitoring, so you get endpoint analytics with Windows 365 on the enterprise version. You get no monitoring at all on the business version. Obviously, Azure Virtual Desktop, you get Azure Monitor. User profiles we've already spoken about. Networking we've already spoken about. And auto scaling, you don't need it because there's a fixed monthly cost. But obviously, Azure Virtual Desktop, we can scale up or scale down as much as we want to. So licensing, as we touched upon, you need a Windows 10 enterprise license for both of these products. Okay, so that's most people should have that anyway. For Windows 365, you need an additional license, which is the Windows 365 Cloud PC license. That's the cost that we just showed previously. And then with the Azure Desktop, Azure Virtual Desktop, obviously you can pay for your computer storage separately as well. Networking, Windows 365 Enterprise, you pay for the networking consumption as you would do with Azure Virtual Desktop. With business version, you actually get allocated bandwidth. Okay, so I think you get like, by default, it's 12 gig a month and for the smaller SKUs, but the bigger VMs you get, the more bandwidth you get. I think it goes up to like 70 gig a month. I don't know how they enforce that, but be wary of how much you're downloading as well within that PC. Okay, the other one was Intune. So Intune is required for enterprise license, so make sure you've got the license for that. Business, you don't need an Intune license, it's optional. As I found out yesterday, you can actually register. It does register against Intune, so that's interesting to see what will work with that on the business version. Again, Azure Virtual Desktop is optional to use Intune to manage your environments. Again, Office, so you need Office subscription will work on any of those two. Obviously, you need the one with SEA rights for Azure Virtual Desktop. Licensing, you just go to the portal and assign licenses to the users. You can automate that as well, but you purchase the licenses and then you have to allocate the license to the user for them to be able to allocate the VM. Nerdio, so disclaimer, I work for Nerdio. I won't be doing a job, we didn't tell me about it, but we support Windows 365 from day one, and we've been working very closely with the engineering team. So we give you the option to basically deploy and manage Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 from the same place. We're going to give the option to basically create images for Windows 365 and share those images with AVD as well. And we can do stuff like assign users and groups and provision, reprovision them and stuff like that. But I'll go through that shortly as part of the demo that we're about to do. And that's what it looks like. But again, I'll show you that shortly. Okay, that's the presentation bit. So I managed to write that whole presentation in 15 minutes, which is a world record for me. I'll do the fun demo bit. Okay, let me just get this, let's just get this one. Right, okay, so I'm going to show you it in a few different dashboards. So this is what you see in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager, okay, so MEM console, right? So within here, you see this Windows 365 provisioning, yeah? So to set up a provisioning, you basically need to meet there's a criteria you have to meet. So you have to create this provisioning policy. So this provisioning policy is basically saying, what criteria do I need to meet before I will provision a cloud PC? Because what's worth mentioning is these cloud PCs are automatically provisioned. You don't tell it to go and do something. You set a load of criteria. When something meets that criteria, it will go and create it for you in the background automatically. Okay, so I can create this policy. And this policy will basically say, I want this test policy, okay? And then it's going to ask me what network connection I want to use, right? So the reason why this is here is because obviously it needs to do the domain join and needs to have connectivity back to your physical or your virtual environment that you've got set up within Azure, okay? So I've got at least one 365 network that created. So I'm just going to here. And then we select our image. As we touched upon before, we can select a gallery image or a custom image. So from here, I can just go in here and I can select the Windows 365 SKU. So I'm going to select the Windows 10 Enterprise with apps. Okay. Going to select that. Click next, and then assignment. So I can select my groups. So for example, I'm going to select Cloud PC test and Cloud PC. Select those. So they're the groups that you put the users into. Okay. So next, review create. And that is pretty much it. Sounds exciting, right? And that's it. That's pretty much all you have to do with it. Obviously, you need to set up the on-premise connection. Okay. And then basically what's going to happen is when someone is added into that group and they also have a Cloud PC license assigned, which you can, let me get to here. Oh, let me, which one was this one? That was the, yeah, this is the portal one. So again, where are you? Yeah, here. So you can see if you go down to billing licenses, you can see to make sure if you've got the license assigned here, and then you should see this here. So this is the Windows 365 Enterprise license that I've got assigned to this user, which is assigned from another portal. Okay. And then from within there, yeah, you can see that. And as I say, that's it. And then when you go into the provisioning, you go to all Cloud PCs. So within here, you can have a look. So that's my Cloud PC that's been provisioned. It took around half an hour to provision that. As soon as I did the AD group, just dropped it into the AD group and job done, and that was it. And then again, you can connect to it from your normal client. Okay, so if we connect to my remote desktop client, let me bring that up and show you. So this is my remote desktop client. So as you saw, we did it through the portal a minute ago, but these are my Azure virtual desktops, and this is my Cloud PC desktop. Yeah. So again, I just connect to it exactly the same as I would do with a normal desktop. So you just again, that's it. So as to me, this is exactly the same as your AVD, and you can get the connections as well. So you can run speed tests just to show how fast it is within the data center. But yeah, you're really about a lot faster than my home internet connection anyway. So yeah, you're getting nice speed there. Okay. And so I'll show you the Nerdio integration. So the Nerdio integration, essentially we've added this into the application. So again, exactly the same process. I just go in here, I'd create a policy, same stuff in there. So I can go in here, select the SKUs, select the network connection. So as you can see here, this is all within one screen, rather than just multiple screens that we had previously. So slightly different. Type of description test, for example. Clicking OK, and then that'll go away and it create that. And once you're in there, again, pretty much similar thing to here, but the difference here, I can do this. So I can go in here, I can restart it and reprovision it from this menu as well. And we'll get all the logging and stuff that you get in here as well. And also we've added user settings. So in here, we're going to add stuff in there. So the one we've got at the moment is to add the local admin enabled. So I'll just put that in there as well. So a lot more functionality is coming to enable that stuff in there. Yeah, and as far as Cloud PC is concerned, that's it. I think Chris Wright mentioned at the beginning, it's slightly underwhelming. It's, to me, it's a different way of provisioning desktops. So the technology's always been there. It's just desktops and different subscription, and you provision them a different way. But it's good for customers. It's got people talking about VDI, and so it'll be interesting to see people's reactions to it over the next few months, and see what we get. So that's it. What's people's thoughts on that? I'd be interested to hear your feedback.
Neil, just a quick question there. I've posted a couple of screenshots within the chat.
Yeah.
We had some issues yesterday. with the CPU just maxing out on the 2 virtual CPUs.
Okay.
Now, I don't know whether, was it yesterday or the day before, or whatever day it was, don't know whether it was something to do with issues in the Microsoft data centers with everyone signing up for trials. What's been your performance wise like?
It's been fine. I've been using it day to day, as you can see. Let me just load up performance more. But yeah, I've had none problem. It's been responsive. Let me just check. Yeah, so I'm just sat there running about 20% CPU. So
Yeah, but have you really tested it, Neil, or have you just played pinball?
I've been using that Russian browser that you keep telling me about, Yandex. But no,
I'm sick of hearing it.
I mean, yeah, I'll be honest with you, I've not put it through its paces or used it as my daily VM, but I've just been logging on now and again and just testing stuff. But yeah, I've not had those problems. So
yeah, I mean, we had Outlook open, Teams, and one tab within Edge.
Right.
Yeah, and also when you look at the hard drive, they don't look like they're SSDs. I don't know whether that's just the information that the VMs are pulling through, or
Okay.
you know,
Tell you what, let's do a quick test, shall we? Let's have a look, see what speed we're getting.
So there's a gotcha there, then, Neil. I would know. So basically, if you do like crystal disk tests, you get 200 megasecond. But if you do a continual test over a period of time, the larger, so the 4 CPU, you're getting around about 72 megasecond bandwidth. And then on the small 4 gig and 8 gig 2 CPU, you're getting around about 42 meg. So if you try and launch any significant apps, you know, it just crunches. And as you know, if you start saturating the disk, it affects the CPU and RAM.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to run this and see what I get.
It could be data center contention, like Toby mentioned.
Could be.
Oh, I suggested.
Yeah.
They might be slightly low spec SSDs with small caches as well. Maybe if you're seeing good performance and then it drops off a cliff. I don't know what's in the back end.
Right, let's do test there. Okay.
There's your next feature for Neil for Nerdio, bandwidth testing on disks.
Yeah.
Ask for a pay rise while you're there.
Okay. Okay. So I've not used this in ages. So start test. What do you want to do? Let's see. Go. I can't remember. How did you do this one? Right. I can't remember, but yeah, all right. Interesting. I'll test that and do some comparisons side by side. It'll be interesting to see other people have mentioned similar things, because that's not good if you're getting those kind of speeds and performance.
Well, I spoke with a press license to the guys at UL, and they do like Lenovo physical hardware testing and all the other main vendors. So I ran them tests, and it kind of was great for running Office. But if you try and do anything exciting, all three match the same. But the fundamental pinpoint was the disks. That was the fundamental issue. So I asked the powers that be at Microsoft, I won't name and shame because we're being recorded, but they stated that there's more options and more features coming very soon. That was the official statement.
Right. Okay. So maybe they've got different performance tiers for the discs potentially.
I think the pricing team are still playing around with spreadsheets. Is probably what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Hopefully not on one of their cloud PCs.
Yeah. But no, you say it is like version 1, so I guess we need to give them a bit of slack. But yeah, that could be a problem, I guess, for a lot of people, couldn't it, really? So, because disk outs, as we know, is one of the most important things, the performance-wise.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm assuming it's going to change. It's a V1 product on a trial build.
Has anybody actually paid for it and tested a paid version? That is the question.
Good point. Yeah,
I was going to, because I couldn't get hold of a trial license, but no, not yet.
Yeah, that's probably partly my fault.
Well, actually, I've got access to 3 desktops. I've got my Nydia one that we do development with, and a private one that I've done the cloud trial with, and then obviously a full AVD desktop as well. So that'll be might do some performance testing, see what the differences are. Because in theory, right? Because if you pay for it, it should be all the same, right?
Yeah, but you can choose the disk speed in AVD. That's the thing. You can specify exactly what disk you want. This is get what you're given.
Yeah, so I believe I've been told it's just a standard say SSD, so not the premium SSD. But I think some people, I remember seeing a blog post that someone did some testing, and they tested a standard HDD versus a standard SSD, and they were both exactly the same performance.
Yeah, because again, it's contention. They're basically bandwidth sharing across the tenant.
Yeah.
The other thing as well is I noticed. So I spun up 3. I got 1 in the UK and my tenants in the UK, and I got 2 in the Netherlands. And so I said to the powers that be, yeah, I've got 3 VMs. One of them's in the UK. The tenant's in the UK, and I've got them.
Yeah.
And they said they all should be in the same region.
Okay, interesting.
So the internet speed in the UK is around about 890 meg download and similar upload. But in the Netherlands, when I connect from the UK, I'm getting about 200 to 400 tops.
Right. Okay.
So I think it's early days, isn't it? That's probably what we're seeing.
Yeah, because when I asked someone about how does it know where to provision, because obviously we don't get the option about where to provision that desktop. And I was told it provisions it depending on what your VNet location is. So, for example, your VNet's in UK South, it should provision the desktop in UK South.
Yeah, but that's for enterprise, because you can specify all of that because of how it injects in. But if you go for the business version, it should be reading your 365 organizational details. So if you set in the UK, it should basically say, right, UK organization, UK tenant will spin up that. That's what it should be doing, I believe.
Yeah. But maybe if it's full in UK South, for example, or something, it'll
the next there is
location.
that. Yeah. There is that issue, yeah.
But again, I mean, it highlights a problem which a lot of people are saying: you don't have any control, and you're in full destiny of what Microsoft are going to give you.
Check the SLA. I would check the SLA.
He's been saying it all day. All day, honestly, I've had non-stop check the SLA. The other thing though, if you go back a few years, and I think Toby mentioned it as well, is people have been doing this RDP desktop with the Office apps for years, right? They've been delivering this cloud PC service. So a lot of organizations in like small or micro, I don't know, 20, 30 people already have this type of service. Mm-hmm. So, they probably already have these sort of issues and problems. So maybe this is just obviously shock or new to us all. So we don't actually realize that this is, what you should expect. Like you don't have control of what you get. You just get given this, and this is the service you should expect. Yeah. But, if you want the service and the performance, then you need to probably do AVD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what your feeling is, but my gut feeling is this is not going to be as popular as people think it is. Purely because, I mean, if you think about it from a higher level point of view, you're paying more for something which you have less control of.
Yeah.
When you think about that, that's a bit crazy. Why would you do that?
The response to the marketing has been incredible, though. Like when a few people we know at Microsoft kind of put it on their LinkedIn status, there are hundreds of replies from people wanting to know more about it. So I think it's worked well as a marketing option, we discussed earlier. But,
yeah. I mean, it was Inspire's #1 session, and the Microsoft Mechanics video has got nearly, well, at the time, last week, it was like over 800,000 views. So there's immense people looking at it, but if you look at it, it's nothing new. It's just a different way of provisioning. We've been doing this stuff for years. It's just a different way of provisioning desktops. That's my opinion. I don't know what you guys think. I think you put it right at the beginning where you said, well, how do you feel about it? Slightly underwhelming. Because you just provision, well, that's it. You're just provisioning desktops simpler and easier, but they're more expensive and you have less control. So it's weighing up those options about what to do for your customers and what the customers want. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, look, it looks good. It's a PaaS solution of like AVD, isn't it? So
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
IAM solution of AVD, and then you got the PaaS solution. Whoever hasn't got the skills to actually put an AVD solution in, so
Yeah.
it's good. So we'll see how, I don't know, we'll see how it goes and how many people, enterprise users, start connecting to them, and it's early days now, so we'll see how it goes.
Exactly. So
It wants to be a PaaS solution, but the thing is, although it kind of gives the impression that you don't need any Azure infrastructure, you do. You still need that VNet in place, don't you? You still need an Azure presence for it. So I don't know. It's not quite as simple as maybe it should be, or maybe it could be, or it needs to be if it's going to get much traction.
The problem you've got, though, and this is a fundamental thing, is we all look at it from, various different medium, large enterprise, because AVDs and all of the virtual desktop infrastructure is pitched at that angle, right? When you go back down the scale, the number of businesses just in the United Kingdom alone, there's billions of them, there's all over the place, and they could be 1 man, 2 man, 4, 8, 12. And a lot of these people don't actually have like Active Directory or any of that infrastructure. They're using like Gmail and a Synology NAS with a little VPN connector so they can connect at home. And then they go to the local pub and brag to you, and you're thinking, what the hell's going on? What are you on about? You have no idea, or they say they're an amateur professional. And I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? So, for these people who want to connect with a simple VPN, the business version, I actually think Microsoft have been quite clever here. They're actually going after the micro market, but in volume, I reckon that is a massive financial take. And considering they're already at a subscription level and the turnover, serious numbers now, they're all into the trillions. I think they're going to double the money again by going after a global microeconomy, as I call it.
Fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely a huge market potential. And those, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I think the market which you just mentioned, that is the key market for this, definitely.
Will Citrix Cloud still be around if this takes off? That's the question.
I reckon it'll be API integrated at some point, I reckon.
Because you look at the pricing for Citrix Cloud, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they say minimum 25 users. So yeah, it's interesting.
But the problem you've got with Citrix is they hold the global market brand. When you speak to these schools and colleges and these people in the railway industries, they all say, I need Citrix. They don't say I need a virtual desktop. They say Citrix. So
no, they all say they need a NetScaler, not an SD1.
Yeah, they're basically that. So, to change that culture, how long will that take? So we'll see. It's, the association is quite a powerful marketing tool, right?
Yeah, guys, can I jump in here as well? So, Croft, just wanted to touch on Citrix stuff now. I'm going to hold my hand up and probably get flamed for this, but we are a Citrix reseller, so don't shoot the messenger here.
Can we boot off from here? I'm joking.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Mute him.
But no, what I was going to say was, I kind of agree with you, to be honest, because it's really we've been looking, hard at this. But one of the things we've seen and really seen a growth in is the CSP side of the Citrix thing. It's a completely different animal. Yeah, it's the same product, but they take away the limit of how many users you have to do per client as soon as you go into the CSP model. And it's something the channel aren't pushing a lot. I don't know if there's any other Citrix partners or whatever on here, and because this has been recorded, I'll probably get an email in the poll, an email from our channel partner or something giving me a hard time over
Bleep it, Neil. Bleep it.
I can stop recording.
No, not at all. Don't be daft, mate. I've said this to them before. I've got no shame here. So, but it is interesting. You're absolutely bang on. I do see this as it's not as cheap as I think people have made it out to be, Windows 365, given some of the limitations. But I think you're right. I think there's definitely a market segment we're going after. And to us, in terms of the kind of managed services that we either use or wrap around or do whatever with stuff, I still think Azure Virtual Desktop, has got a lot more, at the moment anyway, based on what I've seen with Windows 365, a lot more kind of flexibility, in the way it does. But you're right. I think you're absolutely right, guys. But, I think Citrix are going to have to be careful, because people are going to be looking at the bottom line. And yeah, colleges are saying it, but I know for a fact, I won't say who, but there are two big organisations in Scotland seriously rethinking their Citrix stuff based on everything that Microsoft are doing. And actually Nerdio did come up as well, but we won't say any more about that.
The problem you've got though, and I recently did the books on all of them because I did an evaluation of all of the kind of tier 1 vendors. The problem you've got is, and Steve Horn on the call always refers to it like ice cream, you know, someone wants chocolate, someone wants mint. They're all the same thing, but they have different flavors and different ways of offering things. But when I did some price analysis, and I won't mention names of vendors because Nerdio's in the pile as well, with 2 of the vendors, there was only $1 difference. $1 more for more features, and some of the the features are more suitable for some customers than others. So I honestly believe that you've literally been given a market choice, and whatever you say or do, people will favour one over the other based on a specific need or a flavour, or just because they like to drive around in a flash car and have a flash VDI brand to kind of brag about in the local pub, like a Synology NAS. I think that's pretty much what it is.
Try changing a Citrix ICA client to a PC over IP client, and then you'll get mass revolution, honestly, from the end users. It's the same thing, in theory.
Yeah, 2 people have put the hand up. Jeremy, do you want to say something?
Thanks. I just wanted to comment. Yeah, for me personally, we've been dealing with the very small market. For many years, we hosted our own private clouds and the rest of that for so long. And it was always very difficult to help out the 1, 2, 3 user organizations. And although this is relatively more expensive than AVD, which I have loved and deployed the Jesus out of, it fits better for those very small markets. Now, AVD, I think, will become a premium choice pretty quick here as soon as that Azure AD join is there. So I don't have to deploy a domain controller. I don't have to deploy an ADDS. None of that is there anymore, and those costs will all go away. And I'll probably end up just using AVD at that point because multi-session, densification, it's just so much easier to deal with. But I do see this being for some of my clients where it was one person who ran a bookshop running Great Plains. This is substantially cheaper than anything we could have ever hosted for them. And so I think that there is the advantage there, like you're talking about the micro market. But some of these features, AD Join, like I said, is going to make it far more competitive for AVD, in my opinion. Plus the licensing's there too. So many of my clients are already on business premium licensing anyways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what I've discussed with our CEO Vadim as well is what he's anticipating, which I agree with, is a lot of customers may start off with this Windows 365 journey, realize the limitations, and then go up to Azure Virtual Desktop when either the company grows or they've got a feature or they need DR or something, or there's an outage and stuff like that. So that's another, it may be sort of an on-ramp onto Azure Virtual Desktop as well. So that's be quite interesting to see how that pans out.
Smaller. Yeah, it's just a lot smaller resistance to getting into AVD, right? So it's a very small commitment. It's a very small price. And it allows people to kind of start going, okay, I think we can make this commitment for a year or 2 years or something, and eventually you find that you want AVD and you find a good CSP to work with and all the rest of that, and it just becomes a part of your business. But if I came to you and you're a small bookkeeping company and I said the cost is going to be at least $300 a month for this, that's really hard to justify for one person. But if I told you it was $30, that's a big difference. And then eventually, as your company grows, you might say, okay, now I need to scale. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Cool. We've got another question for Dietmar.
Yeah, that's right. So just quickly on Jeremy's thought there. You said that ADDS is coming, but I don't think there's any plans for ADDS, right? It's just Active Directory join, which is the authentication part, but not actually the ADDS. So I think group policies, I don't think there's any plans for that, or am I wrong? I think we would still need hybrid join.
I think that's a fair distinction. I think you're probably correct, and I may have misspoken a little bit.
Yeah, I think they make Azure AD join. So
Yes,
that's
Azure AD join. Yep.
yeah. So that's the one that's coming. I think Azure Active Directory Domain Services is in ADDS. I think that's going to die a slow and painful death. Microsoft seemed to put a lot into it when it was initially released, but I think a lot of people just find the limitations of it too much. And I'd be very surprised if it's around in the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 5
agree.
years.
Yeah, it needs to either get polished up and work a lot better, or it's not. It's too expensive. It works too slow. But I think we all wished it was going to be what it was supposed to be, which is just a get rid of our domain controllers sort of mentality.
Yeah, agreed.
So what's the replacement then? Is it going to be Intune policies, or how is it going to work?
So I presume the way Microsoft are doing it is it's going to be Azure AD managed by Intune. So that's the way going forward. So you can have all your GPOs moved into Intune/Ben. But it's going to take us a while to get there because obviously legacy. Anything realize needs authentication for Active Directory or LDAP authentication. So I don't think Active Directory is going anywhere anytime soon. But it's a step forward, essentially. So especially for those brand new companies who want to deploy and they don't have an AD Active Directory instance, because that's the biggest challenge. Like if I want to deploy your version of desktop today or use this, I have to deploy an AD instance, even if I'm a brand new company and I don't want AD because I'm using all these other modern authentication protocols. It's definitely the way forward, but it's going to take us a few years to get there. Okay, anyone else got any thoughts or opinions about it? Want to make any comments? Nope.
There's one little one. I just put it in the link. There's a Twitter link about the disk speeds, which was quite, yeah, there's on Reddit as well, which was quite interesting. So I expect more of that.
Link. The comments on that link, my God.
There's a lot of people.
Great.
Let's have a quick look. Okay. Oosh, yeah. 126. Okay. 249. Yeah, okay. Cool. I'm going to test that tonight, actually, and see what we get. Be quite interesting. Okay, cool. Anything else before we disappear?
No, just thanks, Neil. Really appreciate you taking the time to put this together for us.
Good one, mate. Really was.
To be fair, I did it in record time, half an hour for everything tonight. So massively underprepared. So I'll know better next time. But no.
Thanks for Neil. Very good presentation, and shows us more on learn more about that 365 desktop as well. Yeah, no problem. As I say, next month's wide open. So if anyone wants to present anything, just give us a shout. Okay, right. I'm going to give you back 20 minutes of your time.
Thanks very much, Neil.
All right.
Cheers,
all the best.
All right.
All the best.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Go and buy some.